Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Prove Me Wrong podcast. As always, I'm your host, Pete Lieb. It's a paranormal podcast again tonight, and my guest is Justin Bamforth. You know by now that I'm a paranormal nut. It's one of my hot buttons. I've had several shows across varied topics in the past. I'm always on the lookout for new and fresh perspectives to explore. Justin is the author of the book The Spectrum, Glimpses of the Paranormal and Encounters with the Strange, and has been exploring paranormal phenomena, the UFO topic, reports of men in black, and other areas of high strangeness for close to 2 decades. He lectures on the subject, collaborates with researchers on cases, and consults with people worldwide to better understand what it is that we're dealing with. He has been featured on programs such as Coast to Coast AM, Midnight in the Desert, Dr. Jave Radio Live, and numerous other podcasts such as ours right now. Justin is a creative professional by trade, where he spends most of his 9 to 5 in advertising and marketing, which is an equally bizarre world of its own. Justin's website is normalparanormal.org, and you can also find his book on Amazon.com. So without any further ado, thank you, Justin, for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Pete. It's an honor
Not a
to be
problem.
here.
It happens. So can we start just a bit with your background? I just kind of read in the bio here that typically you're in marketing, and we all have 9 to 5s for the most part. What was it that happened to you? Was there an event that happened specifically that got you started on this path? What got you into the paranormal?
Well, I think like anyone who is in this field can tell you, we don't seem to choose to pursue this, the phenomenon, as I like to refer to it
Right.
as. It seems to choose us for whatever reason. And like so many others, my origin story, so to speak, it began at an early age as well. However, it wasn't until I started this little online group called Normal Paranormal, maybe about 10 or so years ago, that kind of exploded into the website and blog that I run today. That has allowed me to kind of like reach out to other people and connect with lots of different experiencers who have just shared their story. And I've noticed that there's been like some crossovers with other people's stories, some commonalities, some similarities. It's been a really wild ride. So as far as like my interest in this, it's always been there. It's just, it's taken some interesting turns along the way, so to speak.
Something happened to you as a child then. So something happened to you as a younger man that set you there. And I'm just asking that because I know some people, usually the believers and usually the people who really become involved, something happened to trigger it.
Right. Yeah. And I used to tell people at one point that, it was because I lived in a haunted house, right? There was one of my childhood homes I spent most of my childhood in. It had lots of activity. But looking back on it now, I now refer to it as a haunted experience because, I've kind of changed my thinking and my perspective when it comes to what is a ghost, what is the paranormal. And I think looking back on the experiences, I think there was a lot with the mindset that my family was in at the time that kind of, I guess, helped to kind of manifest this stuff or maybe even heighten it to some extent. Very strange things. But again, I think it was because of the environment. And I think we as investigators tend to overlook that a lot of times is, we're quick to jump to the idea that a ghost is the spirit of a dead person, right? And like aliens are from outer space. Well, it may not be that simple. There may be a part of it that's connected to us in more ways than we like to like to admit.
Mm-hmm. So your book is titled The Spectrum, again, Glimpses of the Paranormal and Encounters with the Strange. It's a collection of accounts from individuals spanning all types of different paranormal contact. How did you locate and research and vet the stories that you use for your book?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier with the website, normalparanormal.org, that has been a huge tool in order for other people to reach out to me. But I've heard stories over the years by listening to, shows like Coast to Coast, with the late great Art Bell.
Yeah.
And, after hearing some of these tales, that was it. Like there was nothing else to read up on, or to do research with. So I thought, well, you know what? These people must still be out there. Let me see if I could try to track down some of them, maybe see if I can locate some of them. And, thanks to social media, you'd be surprised at how easy that is.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is when you begin to put yourself out there and let people know that you're willing to talk about this subject, it actually makes people feel more comfortable to also bring their friends in and have them share their experiences with you. And there's a sort of trust that grows. And once you develop that trust, then people will begin to share more things with you. And I found out with a lot of these experiences, they don't just stop at the experience. There's a lot more to it. But if we're only, focused on one particular aspect of it, people are only going to share that one particular aspect. You kind of have to allow them to tell their story.
Well, I know, and the internet is, for all of its faults, that is one of the best pieces of the internet, because when these things happened in the past, who did you tell? You told the local constable, or you told the sheriff, or what have you. They called you a kook and they walked on, and suddenly you were the kind of the town crazy. Now we're in a place where you can put that online. There are hundreds of these Facebook groups or things like that where people are sharing stories, sharing experiences, and you are immediately surrounded by people who believe in what you're seeing and what you're saying. They're there to support you. They'll give you again, there's a back and forth, which just did not exist. If somebody saw an alien, had an alien visitation 50 years ago, there was nobody to tell. They were just out in the cold. Yeah, they hid it. Now you have Navy pilots putting their the video on YouTube, and you're seeing it yourself. So that's actually really, really awesome. Do you do though so when you have these stories and you interview them and you talk to them, what do you do? How do you determine whether or not the person is credible? I mean, some people are credible and some people are not. How do you make that determination?
Well, I always like to leave it with the reader or the audience, so to speak. I do that because I wasn't there when the experience happened.
Mm-hmm.
I can't prove that it happened because I wasn't there. It wasn't for me. But I also wasn't there to disprove it either. So when a lot of these people share their stories, it's on them. I mean, if they're pulling my leg, and there have been some instances of that, you can usually pick it out pretty well. There are certain red flags to watch out for. However, when you interview these people, there is a sincerity in their voice, in their mannerisms, that they aren't making it up. Now, that doesn't say that their experience can't be easily explained away. A lot of times people will share an experience with me and they'll be so convinced it was the ghost of their deceased grandfather, right? And then as I'm looking at more of what they're telling me or some of their evidence, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's just like leaky pipes or something, or a noisy house, whatever. But sometimes people are so set in their ways, they refuse to accept that. They refuse to, go out of that realm of possibility that it could be something very normal. But every once in a while, you'll get one of these stories that it leaves you wondering, did this really happen? This person, they think it really did. And it's very intriguing. And then you have cases that always interest me. You have multiple witnesses, right, that can vouch for that primary witness. Or you have evidence to support their story. A lot of times I get forwarded links to videos and pictures from sites like YouTube and Reddit, right? Just these BS things. They are hoaxes a lot of the time,
right?
Or they're misidentified. So what I caution people with regards to those sites is to look for these things. Is there an exact date and time? Is there an exact location? Are there actual names of the witnesses that you can follow up with? is there more that allows us to actually conduct an investigation or do further research on it? If there isn't, then it's probably bogus. But if there is, I encourage people to just do their own research. I put these stories out there in the hopes that people will take it to the next level, and maybe they'll find something that I overlooked or that I didn't even bother to ask. I may not have all the answers, but if I can get people to at least start asking the right questions, then I think I've done my job.
So you actually go out and do paranormal investigation as well. It's not just I'm collecting stories. I'm actually going out and doing that as well. What type of investigations have you conducted? What have you done?
Well, so I've done a lot of residential cases. I don't, way back in the day, I used to do them a lot more than I do them now. Nowadays, my role has kind of evolved into more of like a, just like a consultation, almost just like a, tell me your story. Like, let's just talk it through. What are you experiencing? And especially in, our current state right now where we can't really get out much.
Right.
A lot of people just want to share their experiences. They just want to get another perspective on it. A lot of times people, they don't want a whole team of investigators coming into their house with all their, equipment and all of their, intrusive, techniques and whatnot. It's very hard on the homeowner or the person involved. So, we have to be very mindful of that as investigators and researchers too. It also doesn't just end with the investigation. It's a lengthy process. A lot of the people that I still am in communication with today, they had activity, years ago, but I like to just follow up with them just to make sure that it hasn't all of a sudden, come back, or that, something new didn't come up. It is our responsibility, I think, as investigators to kind of not just look at it as the investigation, but as, this is part of these people's lives, and this activity could be with them forever. There's no way to get rid of it or control it, really.
Well, my own personal experience, I had several, but it was all in one location. It was one particular house growing up. That was my cousin's home. And you're right, I was 11, 12, 13 in that range. It happened over a couple of summers. And I'm in my 40s now, and it's still with me. I still remember it. I still relay it, and still plays in my head. That is kind of what drives me to have all these podcasts themselves. So you are right. When you have that type of experience, it absolutely stains you. You keep it for a while because you just don't know. It actually it gives you a whole sense of what else is there. It gives you when you have that experience, you start to think, your brain opens up and you're like, there is something more than what you're doing right now. This piece of existence, there's something else there. Some people take that, it gives them hope. I don't know why it would scare you, but some people get incredibly scared. But just something new. It's something different, something you can't see. Yeah. But to go back to your book, so the title of the book is called The Spectrum. Again, is it a reference to your belief that all paranormal experience across the board is just part of one continuous spectrum of activity? Is that am I saying it right? Or
yeah, I think that would be a fair assessment. I mean, I think the data is leading us to at least consider this, right? I mean, there's been lots of case studies to suggest it. I mean, you look at, for example, Bigfoot cases, right? There's this, UFO component. Well, what is that? Should we just, ignore it, or should we separate it? Should we send it to the ufologist to investigate? I mean, we're doing ourselves a disservice as investigators and researchers when we tend to categorize this stuff and try to classify it, right? Because the phenomenon is not, you can't contain it. It does whatever it wants to do. And I think that notion is very unsettling when you think about it, right? There could be, certain window areas, so to speak, right? Like, for example, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 and 67, there was these Mothman sightings, right?
Right. Absolutely.
But on top of that, there were, UFO reports. There were Men in Black encounters. There were all sorts of strange things going on. Or take, for example, more recent times like Skinwalker Ranch. The History Channel has a show out right now called The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
It's all about this. Out at that place, it seems to be like a cyclical thing, right? So there'll be like a point where there's a lot of activity, and then a point where there's no activity. What is that? But all sorts of activity. I think we need to really begin to address what is this activity, or more importantly, what forms could it be taking in order for us to perceive it? It may be that the source of the phenomenon is not tangible at all, but it's just taking on a form so that we can visibly see it or experience it. Writing the book and interviewing all these people, I began to get away from the experience itself, or that fascination with the experience, and I began to look at the people involved. How did that experience impact them? How did it change their thinking? How did it, in some cases, cause a complete reversal of what they thought to be truth before, and now it's kind of led them down a different path? That could be telling about how the phenomenon may be operating, and it may need us more than we'd like to admit.
Well, it's interesting you had mentioned a couple of things there. One, I've had a show with a Bigfoot hunter, and I brought up the whole UFO aspect. There are some people pushing that potentially they are interdimensional beings and they come in on a spacecraft, and right. He scoffed at that, right? Because he's a purist. They are a beast we have not found yet, and he wasn't interested in hearing anything else about that. And I also had an interview with about the Mothman, and during the conversation we were talking about the Mothman, and then he did mention there were UFO encounters around the same time. I said, was there ever any indication that somebody's investigated a link between those? And he's like, oh, well, no. And it was like, well, why not? So it's interesting that you had said that, because that was the thing that got into my brain too, is why are we assuming that is a creature and not potentially an alien, or an alien visitation, a contact of some kind? If you are seeing alien spacecraft, if you are seeing Men in Black, why would you think that is? Now there are three things coming there, where the most logical thing is they're all connected. It's all one thing. But that was that. Again, that's just me. Are there a couple of stories from your book that you tend to keep coming back to that you really think are your favorite? Are there a couple of things that are your favorite accounts in the spectrum?
Yeah, I have my favorites because of the implications that it could mean here with some of them. But let me ask you this, Pete. What are your favorite stories, or what are the ones that intrigue you the most?
So I have been interested in these Men in Black and trying to figure out, what is this supposed to be? What is the goal of the Men in Black? What are their characteristics? What is their purpose supposed to be? And I know I had heard and seen. I've seen the video where they're coming into the allegedly these are Men in Black coming into a hotel. Yeah. So that is interesting to me. It's also interesting to me, we're talking about parallel universes, that I could exist millions of times, or an infinitive number of times. Time slips, people just losing time. There was a very famous story, I think, of a man flying through the Bermuda Triangle, and there was a cloud cover, and he flew through the cloud cover, and when he came out of the cloud cover, it had been like 20 minutes, but he was over Florida when he came out of the cloud cover, and there should have been no possible way that he was there. How did he travel that distance in that short amount of time? Those type of occurrences, those all are incredibly interesting to me, and things that I would, love to talk about. But can we start with the Men in Black, if you don't mind?
Sure.
And
yeah.
I know that is one that you, that's one that you investigated. So could you give me a little bit more on that?
Yeah. So the Men in Black stuff, I always get asked that probably the most, because it's so fascinating. It's just so intriguing. And believe it or not, there's not as much information out there.
Yeah.
There are not as many people out there looking into this. most people think it's just, a reference to the Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith movie, right?
Right.
But it's so much more than that. The one that you're referring to that I looked into was known as the Shane Sovar case. And that is a really interesting case. I first got involved with it when that video first came out. I think the video was taken in 2009. And there was the founder of that original investigative team, the Aerial Phenomenon Investigations team. They originally looked into it and they posted the video. Coast picked it up, BuzzFeed picked it up, and it just spread like crazy. It wasn't until much later that I got in touch with the principal investigator of that whole thing. And her findings and her thoughts on it were very different from the actual published report on it. Her name is Marcia Barnhart, and if you get a chance, you should bring her on to your show. She is an excellent investigator. But anyway, she shared with me some of the eyewitness testimony to this whole experience. On my own, I was able to figure out who those witnesses were, and the primary witness. She did not reveal that to me for, client confidentiality and all that stuff,
right,
which I admire. So I eventually then got in touch with Shane, and it was really difficult because he had not wanted to talk to anybody about this because there's so much crap out there on the internet. There's so much misconstrued information. And you see this video, it's been circulated and recirculated of these two guys coming into this hotel lobby in Niagara Falls on the Canadian side. But the facts have just been all messed up. So, I told Marcia, okay, I'm going to set the record straight. I'm going to publish this account. I'm going to get in touch with Shane. And what was interesting is when Shane and I were talking, he shared with me some additional things that were not part of the original investigation. Like that Men in Black encounter, that was just the trail end of his experiences. That was not the main thing that he experienced. In fact, he wasn't even at the hotel that day when these guys came in. They started harassing his other employees. But to make a long story short, what happened was Shane and I think his hotel security manager, they saw a black triangle in the sky. And this was back in, I want to say, fall of 2008. And they see this thing fly overhead. They're amazed by it. There was a second encounter that Shane experienced with this object. And he then shared his report with another UFO researcher out there who was looking into the black triangles at the time. There was apparently a lot of other black triangle sightings in that region. And then here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the paranormal comes in. Shane is on his property one day. He's cleaning out the gutters of his house. And this gentleman approaches him. And he just starts smiling at Shane and just, it's a little weird. So Shane comes down from his ladder and he's like, hey, can I help you? And the guy's like, yeah, I built this house. And he's like, oh, okay, you're the original owner. You designed it. What did you do? And the guy's like, no, I built this house. And Shane's like, oh, cool. Let me show you around. So he's showing this gentleman everything. And the guy's just very, very pleased with what he's seeing. And then there was one point where Shane leads him to, I think, around back. And the guy goes like, oh, my daughters used to roll down this hill. And Shane's like, okay, that's cool. And then the guy's like, okay, I'm going to be going now. I'll see you in a year. And he just shuffles down the street. What the heck was that? Just a weird experience, right? Later on, Shane is discussing this incident with his neighbors. One neighbor in particular who had lived there forever. She knew the original owner of the house. And Shane's describing this. And the lady's like, that's impossible. Like, what you're describing is a gentleman who is already dead. Like, that guy died a long time ago. And Shane's like, what? I found out later on, after I published the story, I connected with Shane and his wife up in New York one day. And his wife started sharing with me the fact that she approached a different neighbor who also confirmed the same thing. So what was that? After that experience, all sorts of paranormal poltergeist-like activities started happening in their house. And the family was very distraught by this. They were very upset. They didn't know what it was. They really wanted to just sell the property and leave. It was that bad. Now, I found out later that they were under a lot of stress. And I bring this up because I've noticed that in a lot of these experiences, stress is a key factor, or it may be the trigger in a lot of these experiences. For whatever reason, I don't know yet, but I've noticed this correlation with stress, again, with our mental state and this phenomenon. Then it was in May the following year, 2009, it was Mother's Day, and Shane decides to take a rare day off. Oh, and let me also mention this. When I talked with him about that gentleman who showed up at his house, I also talked with Shane about how he interacted with this gentleman. Now, Shane was a hotel manager at that time. He was always meeting new people. He was always shaking their hand. He was always getting to know them. In this case, he never once made contact with this gentleman. He everything that Shane normally does with a stranger, he did not do with this gentleman. Why is that? I found this in a lot of other reports too. People will tend to exhibit mannerisms that they don't usually do. They respond in a way that isn't characteristic of their typical behavior. And this was no different. So now we're at Mother's Day 2009. Shane takes the day off. That's when these two guys come in looking for him. And that's what you see on the video. Now, you only see these two gentlemen who fit the stereotypical description of the Men in Black come into the hotel lobby. You never see them leave. The MIB, if you will, are interacting with the I think it was the bellman and the hotel tour desk operator. And what they described was very similar. These guys were weird. These guys didn't have any eyebrows, no eyelashes. They didn't even blink. They were just fixated on people. And one of the, when these guys got to the hotel tour desk operator, they affected her so badly on a mental level that she was just in tears, relaying the story to Shane. There's also other aspects of this that make it very interesting as well. People noticed the parking lot attendants. They noticed that these guys came in a vehicle and they parked on the far end of the lot in a vehicle that they could not identify. They just knew it was all black, but they didn't know what type of make or model it was. Now, these are parking lot attendants. They see vehicles all the time.
Right.
How is that possible? I found that consistent with other reports too. These guys will show up in vehicles that aren't typical. Not all the cases are like that, but a good number are, and we can't overlook those things. You know, these are little things here. But that was it. That was essentially what happened. Then these guys left. Nobody really saw them leave. They were just gone. What did it mean? Was there a connection with the guy that showed up on Shane's property and said, "I'll see you a year later"? You know?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That whole thing seems really odd. It seems like there are a lot of unconnected occurrences happening to the same person. Or are we saying that he saw something in the sky and that person who came to the house wasn't actually a spirit at all? It was kind of like that movie Men in Black where the bug is wearing the guy's skin. So, you know, maybe it was a fact-finding mission. Maybe he was coming there to see who it was that had noticed them, and then that's relayed to the Men in Black, and then they come and want to talk. I'm stretching. It feels like a stretch to me, that whole thing, but I don't know.
But you bring up another good point then, right? Like, what is the MO of the MIB? You know, why are they here? A lot of people tend to believe that it's, you know, to shut people up, right? To scare them away. Information suppression, so to speak. It could also be information extraction. You know, I've talked with other people who have had these experiences, and it seems like these guys have to be in the vicinity, maybe to gather something, to gather data. I don't know. It's all highly speculative, but it is fascinating nevertheless. And there is something to be said about it. It's just what? We don't know. So this is a very interesting case, primarily because there's footage to accompany the story. And what's interesting about that footage is the security guy. He burned it to a disc for Shane, and he just gave it to him, and he's like, "Look, I don't know who these guys are, but they came looking for you. I want you to have this just in case something happens to you.
Yeah.
So if he didn't do that, we wouldn't have that footage today. It's not the best footage. It's certainly not the clearest. And, Shane was making the case for years to get them to upgrade the security cameras, but the owner never did. So the hotel is still there today. The lobby still looks the exact same as it did back then. It's just under a different name now. But it still has a lot of, that region has a lot of interesting tales. Not just, MIB, but a lot of high strangeness in general happens up there.
When he saw this triangle craft, did he file a report? Did he tell someone? Did he put it on the internet?
Yeah.
How did they even know that he saw it?
Yeah, he originally reported it to, I think his name is Brian Vike of HBCC UFO Researcher. That's in British Columbia. So, like I said, he was looking, Vike was looking into a lot of these reports at the time. And then the Shane's encounter then was published, I think, in one of the local newspapers. That's how I found him, how I tracked him down. I saw his report there and his name. So I was like, oh, that's the guy. It's got to be the guy. And what's funny is also his wife didn't believe him at the time. She didn't think there was anything to this. It wasn't until she was at the hair salon and her hairdresser was saying, yeah, I experienced the same thing. This is real.
And you had also mentioned, along with Shane, about kind of the poltergeist activity that had occurred in his home. And I had also heard that a lot of the time there are actually not really paranormal, quote unquote. There's not really a ghost moving those things, but it is, a lot of times there is maybe a prepubescent adolescent there, or just right at the age of puberty, who has all that stress and has all that, the hormones are going crazy, and they are actually making those things occur, and they're making those things move. And because I don't think that people really understand the power of the human mind and the power of concentrated thought either. So it's interesting that you say that, because I have read a lot of accounts where, yeah, things were moving, things were falling down, but it also coincided with my daughter, 13, and her hormones and her emotional state, and just moving stuff around. So do you find those type of things to be correlated, to be regular, or is it, or are you taking at face value it's a ghost moving things around?
No, I think it's more, again, speculative, right?
Sure.
I think there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it is connected to our state of mind. It could be that hormones do play a part in this. There's been a lot of research with other investigators who have studied poltergeist activity specifically. And yeah, there's a lot of, prepubescent kids involved with this, or people who are going through it, but there's also adults that experience this as well. You look at some of the similarities between these individuals. Again, stress is a key factor. It's that, I think the entity case, right, that was turned into a movie.
Yes.
That's another great example. Or the San Pedro haunting that Dr. Barry Taff studied. He also studied the entity case. He's done a lot of good research to show that there's this state of mind, that we're in. It could be, now that begs the question, right? Is the state of mind causing the activity, or is the activity always there and our state of mind is just opening up the door for the activity to come in? Could be a combination of both. Again, we need to get around this concept, or this stereotype that ghosts are simply spirits of dead people. There may be evidence to suggest this, yes, but there's also evidence to the contrary. It could be coming from within us. There is, when you look at the evidence that ghost hunters and ghost investigators are coming away with, if they just started to look at it from a different perspective, a different angle, I think what they're getting may be something entirely different than what they think. And that could influence the results too.
I am a believer, and I've told this story on a previous podcast as well. That my daughter tended to walk at night when she was a child, walk without her body. I mean, if you have children, I don't know, but if you have children, when your child has walked into your room. And so I would be asleep and she would be there by the bed. I would feel it clear as day. I felt her energy to the point where I would even say, what do you want? And I would look over, and because usually when a kid's by your bed, they're about to get sick. So, so I look over and she's not there. And I would talk to her mom about that. I'd say, I was sure that she was walking the house, and she felt it too. And she felt the exact same thing. And it kind of, again, leads to, I really do think that the veil is very thin between where we are and where they are, they being in spirits, ghosts, time travelers necessarily, aliens. It's all really thin. And you see it with children a lot too, who are remembering past lives, remembering what they did when they were in their other life. I was in World War II and I was a fighter pilot. And how would you know that? You're 2 years old. So I definitely believe that we're really close. And so then that talks again to parallel universes or alternate realities. Do you have any stories like that where people have had those type of experiences?
Yeah. Actually, I have a story that was shared with me about a year ago or so. That's similar to what you experienced with your daughter. There was a family, they were on a cruise ship, and the dad woke up because he thought that he saw his son walking around to go to use the bathroom, right? And he, I think he shouted for him. He was like, "Derek, what are you doing up out of bed?" And then Derek actually got out of bed and he said, "What are you talking about? Like, I'm right here."
Yeah.
What's fascinating about that is when I interviewed Derek about this, I just had a suspicion that there's something more to this. And I asked him, I said, "Derek, what were you dreaming about right before your dad woke you up?" And he's like, "I was dreaming about going to the bathroom." So did he inadvertently project himself? Is that what was witnessed? Was that a ghost? I mean, there's all these questions. Another good researcher and investigator, Paul Eno, he talked about this. He got me to think completely different about this whole concept. Could ghosts be just evidence of the multiverse or an alternate reality? There was one that he writes about. He refers to it as the almost suicide case, right? Where he was called in to check on a farmhouse that had a lot of activity, and he noticed a strong, again, he had a psychical sense of suicide.
Yeah.
So he searched in and around the upstairs, bathroom, and that seems to be where it was more focused. That's where he got the feeling. But then he asked, a lot of activity was also taking place, near the bathroom and all this stuff. So he asked the woman who lived there if anyone had committed suicide in the bathroom. And the woman looked at him oddly, not because of the question, but because there was a point in time where she had seriously considered suicide in that specific location. So what was that? Was her, did she make a choice in an alternate reality? And now that was what was being picked up on. That was what the activity was. I mean, there was another case that, covered. I love his research, where he, two women wrote to him and they said that they had an experience where they were driving on the road and the one girl jumps out of the car. She's like, I know that house. She runs up to the house. She knocks on the door, and the homeowner answers, screams, gets her husband. They recognize this girl because they are seeing this girl in the house. But the woman is having dreams of being in the house. They had never met before. They didn't even know about this. This was all through Eno's research, but what is that? And why? Like, how can this be? Is the classic ghost that we're seeing in reality today, is it truly a ghost as we have come to understand, or is there something else to this?
That just leads me down. Again, I've had similar conversations with astral travelers or, out of body experiences, things like that. And that does lend you to what I'm seeing truly a spirit of someone no longer living? Or is it the spirit of somebody who is living, who is just simply traveling outside of their body for a while? And I, if it hadn't happened to me, if I had not felt that, and it wasn't just I felt it once, this went on over years. This was maybe 2 years of time where I would feel her in different spots at night, so yeah. I mean, or even to the point with the woman in the bathroom, or was there someone else that potentially had done that before, and maybe that residue affected her and then affected the guy who came in later with the psychic ability as well? It could have affected them both.
Right. And, there was a case that I investigated and I wrote about in the book that I'm really amazed by. There was a med student, and she was working the overnight shift, right? They brought a man in who had OD'd on heroin, and he was brought in unconscious, but they discovered his body completely contorted. It had undergone violent seizures, really horrible things. So his body was in an awkward position. They had to amputate, right? This woman is walking the halls. It was about 1 or 2 a.m. And she saw the man conscious in a wheelchair, just staring down at the ground. And she approached him and asked, can I do anything for you? The man just looked up at her, with sad eyes, and he just shook his head. Now, for some reason, she simply just patted the man on the shoulder and walked away. Again, this gets into this manipulation factor. That's not what she would have done under any other circumstance. She would have wheeled the person back into the room, figured out what room it was. So anyway, she left. And 20 minutes later, she heard code blue over the intercom, which means a cardiac arrest alert. And it was the room of this gentleman. She goes in there, and there he is. But the thing is, according to the records, he had never regained consciousness. He had never left the room. He also had both of his legs amputated to the knee and one arm amputated to the elbow. But she saw him completely intact. So was this like an example of like a bilocality, or was this like a crisis apparition of sorts? Again, the man wasn't deceased. He was still alive, but what she saw was a quote unquote ghost. So what is that? Was it the trauma of the situation? Was he somehow astral projecting himself? Weird stuff.
Yeah, I've long determined. People are always afraid of cemeteries. I'm afraid of hospitals. I mean, hospitals to me have to be the most haunted buildings, places, locations of anything, because every person who goes in there, typically it's a traumatic experience, no matter what happens. It's the worst day of their lives when they're there. And so all that energy has to go somewhere. It doesn't just, a lot of times maybe it just sits right there. So, I mean, those hospitals scare me more than anything. They really do. And I totally can get that. And we had a woman talking about near-death experiences, and she was saying this, she was a doctor, and she was talking about rooms in the hospital that the lights would, the call light would still go on quite often, even though they had disconnected it. And there was an OR that they wouldn't use because the activity in the OR was so pronounced. They just wouldn't use it anymore. They used it for storage instead of an OR. And, those are just really interesting phenomena for sure. Can we talk a little bit about, can we go a little bit more into these time slips and, why somebody would lose time, or what are some of the working theories around kind of this areas of thinner reality where maybe you would either intentionally or unintentionally kind of you walk through and you've lost time, or you find yourself in a place where you didn't realize you were there. Do you have you had other accounts like that?
Yeah, I actually had a personal experience. I wrote about this in the very beginning of the book, where I just started a new job in a town, and I was coming back from work, and I was doing my shopping, and I walked around. I'd gone down the frozen foods aisle, and I rounded the corner to go down the bread and milk aisle. And as I'm going down that aisle, I came across a couple who looked at me like they knew me. They seemed very familiar with me, I guess. I don't know. It was very strange. And I began to think, okay, I don't recognize these people, but they clearly recognize me. Maybe I work with them. You know, like when you
Yeah.
start a new job, you know, you're introduced to a lot of people. You don't know, you know, who knows you, or who has seen you before, because there's so many. Anyways, that's what I thought it was. So I go down and I just, you know, I just smile at them. They smile at me. I go back down the aisle and I think, oh, I forgot to pick up whatever it was down that aisle. So I go back down, make the loop again, and I see the same couple at the same exact spot that I saw them before, give me the exact same expression. And at that point, I was just like, what? This is a weird case of deja vu, right?
Yeah.
But then I thought, it wasn't until after I passed by them that I thought, no, there's something else to this. So I went back up a third time. Now, the way that they were walking, I should have crossed paths with them. I should have. I didn't. And that third time, they were nowhere to be found. I searched high and low over that grocery store, could not find them. For the longest time, I thought that was a time slip, possibly. Because what else would that be? Other than maybe an extreme case of deja vu. I don't know. It wasn't until recently, I'd say maybe a couple of years ago, I was put in touch with one of the shift managers of that particular supermarket at that time. And he had not read my book before. He knew nothing of this. It was actually a friend of mine who did read my book. He put me in touch with him. And he said, you got to talk to this guy. So I did. And this gentleman revealed to me that that particular aisle in that particular store was known as the haunted aisle for all the workers there. They had seen bread flying off the shelves. They had also had encounters with strange individuals who were just roaming about. The guy, it was unbelievable. And the customers have witnessed this too, apparently. So what was it? Was that a time slip? Was that just a crazy area for, haunting activity?
Mm-hmm.
What is a time slip? Why is it these certain areas have a bunch of experiences or a bunch of events? There's so many questions, right? No answers, just more questions. And it's so frustrating and yet so exhilarating at the same
Is
time.
it a thought that maybe, because there are a lot of places in the quote unquote the ley lines and places of maybe the fabric of our specific existence is pretty thin right in those in those areas. Do you think that maybe it's just a matter of you have passed through one of these thinner areas, and maybe you did that same thing twice? You did it in your reality, and then you did it in another reality. You did the same motion, same action. I don't know. I mean, I'm with you. I'm just proposing other crazy ideas as well. But again, if you have enough of those stories, like especially with the Bermuda Triangle and places like that, where people are saying that I traveled an incredible distance in a very, very short period of time. So either I went through some type of vortex that allowed me to travel from one, or a bending of the space that allowed me to go from here to here incredibly quickly. Something happened there. So, that's interesting. I'm just going to jump around a little bit here. So,
Sure.
Doppelgangers. I hear people talk about doppelgangers, and they look just like you, talk just like you. But whenever I hear doppelgangers, I'm a little skeptical of it, because there's got to be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of people who look just like me in the world. There's only so many ways you can put a face together, right? Mostly we have two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, so the features are going to look similar. What is the difference about the doppelgangers that makes it more than just circumstance or just chance?
Well, I mean, again, there's not much evidence, right?
Yeah.
This is one aspect of high strangeness that I have a strong feeling that there are a lot more reports out there than have been shared with the public on. Because again, what do you classify that under?
Yeah.
What do you categorize that with? If you have a doppelganger experience, who do you go to? A ghost researcher, a UFO guy? Like, what do you do? I've begun to start asking that question when I interview witnesses. Have you had experiences where, if somebody has reported seeing a copy of you, or somebody says, oh, I just saw you the other day. And what I'm learning is that in a lot of these cases, that seems to be evident. Not to the extreme nature that we're thinking, a full-blown doppelganger experience, but there are a lot of these familiarity things that tend to pop up time and again. In one case, the Gary Sudbrink case that I investigated, that has a whole bunch of layers to it that have doppelganger aspects. In short, this gentleman by the name of Gary Sudbrink, he received phone calls from what he believes to be men in black in nature, and these phone calls were recorded. I have them up on my website if your listeners want to take a listen to them. Right at the top, it's called "Strange Calls" or "Creepy Calls from a Strange Entity." And in the phone call, the voice is saying to Gary, "You're being impersonated by the other voice." Now, why that's interesting is right before these phone calls happened, Gary was on the phone with a childhood friend of his named Mike. And he was talking, he made a surprise trip to Long Island from Texas. Nobody knew about it, not even his friend Mike. He's calling him. He's trying to make plans with him, but Mike is saying, "Hey, you already called me, buddy. And you sounded like you were sick, so I didn't want to hang out with you." And Gary's like, "What are you talking about? I never called you." Mike's like, "Yeah, you did." Anyways, they're going back and forth. That's when the first of the creepy calls comes in. And thank God Gary instinctively hit record on his answering machine, because he was no stranger to this stuff. And we have these calls. What's fascinating about this encounter is he's had other doppelganger experiences. His brothers, one brother in particular, saw Gary driving up on the road right next to him, trying to get the brother's attention, making all these weird faces. The brother looks over, sees that it's Gary, looks just like Gary, even driving the car that Gary drives, and then Gary drives off. He was just trying to get his attention. He drives off. So his brother then says to Gary, "Hey man, like, what was up with that? Why did you drive next to me and make all these weird faces?" And Gary's like, "That wasn't me. What are you talking about?" What's profound about that is the vehicle that this, doppelganger Gary was seen in. That this was in Long Island, New York. That vehicle was parked in Texas at the time. This was years before the creepy calls thing. How do you explain that? Like, there's all these elements, that just leave me wondering, like, what is it and why is it happening, especially in this way? What does that mean? What's the point?
And there was no evidence of mental instability or sleep, not necessarily sleepwalking, but some people they'll take medication and they will they'll lose time, they'll lose 8 hours, but they'll be traveling, they'll take an Ambien and it affects them to the point where people will think they're awake and they're moving around, but they are mentally gone, they're mentally asleep. I was just throwing out other options.
Well, it goes back to the point earlier, right? I wasn't there to prove the story, but I wasn't there to disprove it either. I did interview the family, and they had a lot of other strange experiences that I only learned about afterwards. It leaves you wondering. It certainly leaves you wondering.
Why do you think that some people are so much more predisposed to paranormal activity or strangeness than others? Some people will go their entire lives with nothing, and then others like Shane or like this last gentleman and his family will have multiple paranormal experiences of different types along the spectrum. Why do you feel that is?
Well, again, this gets into when I interview the witnesses. I don't want to just know about the experience that they had. I want to know their whole life story. I want to get to know them. I want to develop a relationship with them so that they feel comfortable sharing with me, just other things that may be related. I found that it seems like this high strangeness will follow generations of families. It seems like, I don't have any conclusive evidence to prove it, but it seems like it will go through certain family lines, especially when we look at like the alien abduction phenomenon. Abductees will explain that their parent was also an abductee and their parent was an abductee. It seems to be a generational thing. Why is that? Was there a point in time when they somehow maybe, maybe they open themselves up to this kind of high strangeness. Maybe it's the way that they're thinking. Maybe they're chosen for some reason. There's all these things that all these implications, but again, how do you prove that, right? How do you prove that? So I just started like looking for patterns, noting them, and it's helped me to kind of ask the right questions. Again, to not get so preoccupied with the experience, but to begin to understand who the experiencer is. What is their makeup like? What is their thought process? How did this experience change it? Maybe that's why the experience took place. What I've learned with these high strangeness events is they seem to be catered to the individual. It's not meant for the whole world to witness. It's just meant for that person or group of people.
So you mentioned aliens, and I wanted to get your thoughts on aliens real quick. And sure. Based on the accounts you've had, the research you've done, there are a couple of ideas in terms of what an alien, what quote unquote an alien visitation is. Either they are an interdimensional traveler, or they're coming across the universe, or they're coming in from a different parallel universe. I mean, I know we don't have answers to it, but in your personal opinion, are they coming from a distant star, or are they coming from a distant reality?
Again, my personal opinion, I don't think it's that easy.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a black and white thing. I think it's a very complex subject with many different layers. And who's to say that it's one thing or the other? It could be all of these things. But again, I think there's a consciousness connection to this. I think there is information that, for example, you take the recent Navy footage, right?
Right.
When you look at those reports, and a lot of those objects were seen coming up out of the water or going into the water. Well, if this is coming from beyond the stars, why would it be going into the water?
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of reports of underwater submerged objects, USOs, as opposed to UFOs. It's anomalous nevertheless, but where is it coming from? The other thing is when you look at the abduction reports and you look at how these entities are presenting themselves, a lot of times the abductees will ask, where are you from? They'll get different answers. Now you have these typical gray entities, in a lot of the cases, but you have all these other entities as well. But it seems like the stories change. In some cases, they'll be seeing the same thing, but the stories will change. Like, one moment they'll say, oh, we're from out here. Next moment they'll say, well, we're from over here. Or they'll be very, one thing that I do know about the phenomenon, it tends to be very elusive.
Yeah.
It tends to be very covert. It seems like the answers, we're never going to get the answers. It could be because that enables them to maintain this elusiveness, this covert activity. I don't know. But we have to question it. Every time we think we have an answer, we just have to question it. We have to look at it in the sense of like, okay, is this true? These entities are taking me against my will. They're doing all these great things or these horrible things to me, and yet they're saying that it's great. Why should I trust that? Like we need to think about this. How are we reacting to the phenomenon? How are we responding to it? That may be telling as to what it is or where it's coming from. Again, more questions than answers. It's so frustrating, but it's exciting at the same time.
Well, my final question then, let me ask you this. If through all these years of research, you've been doing this for a long time, what have you learned through this research? How has it changed you in what you do on your day-to-day? I mean, have you learned something or have you found something through all this research that has just changed kind of the way you fundamentally think about the world? What is that?
Well, it has certainly got me to approach it from a different perspective altogether. Early on, I thought, yeah, ghosts were simple, right?
Yeah.
EVP, was the voices of the dead, right? UFOs were clearly coming from outer space. I don't think that's the case anymore. And, if anything, this phenomenon has certainly strengthened my own spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
It surprises a lot of people when I admit to them that, I have a Christian way of thinking about this stuff.
Sure.
It certainly surprised a lot of people in my church. But yet this phenomenon is very real. People are experiencing this, and we can't simply just dismiss it. We can't simply say that, again, the church perspective is, oh, it's all demonic. Well,
right.
It may not be, it may be some aspects, but it may not be. And we have to kind of just look at it. We have to be more understanding of people and more patient with people. We have to allow them to tell their story, regardless of what we believe, regardless of what our thoughts are on it. So I've started to just shut up and listen,
Yeah. My final thought on it, I agree with you that I no longer believe that all ghost experience or all haunting experience is truly someone who used to live in this house, they've passed away, and they're still here. I no longer believe that. I've been doing the podcast for a little while now, and I've talked to enough people that my fundamental ideas have changed a little bit on that as well. Also, in terms of, we are not necessarily tied to this body. I may be able to move around through the force of my will, through the force of my brain, through the force of my energy, and that energy can manipulate the space around you. So I agree. There are so many. If you allow your brain to kind of pull that thread and start pulling it, and just start kind of thinking about everything, because what do you accept? You think that an alien is immediately coming from a star. Maybe it's just a time traveler. Maybe it's somebody from 300 years in the future. They're coming back to see what we're looking like now. Of course, their technology is better. Of course, the ship that they have is better than what we have now. It is advanced technology. There's so many things it could bake your noodle. You could talk about it forever, but it is interesting, and it is fun to talk to people who have those experiences. Just to see how it changes them and see how close we can get to the veil. And I think I would like to know more about, and what really confuses me, or what really kind of worries me, are the parallel universes. I think that those are really troublesome. I had a guy talking about, and he starts going into all the realities that could exist and all the things that could happen. And well, you may die in this reality, but you're still living in another, so you are technically immortal. And that just bakes my brain. I'm like, come on, I can't. Oh man, I can't go that far with it yet. I'm not there, but it is interesting. I just wanted to get your feelings about what has changed with you, or what you've taken from this, and how it's how you've incorporated it into your life. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. Once again, the website is normalparanormal.org. And the book is called The Spectrum, Glimpses of the Paranormal and Encounters with the Strange. And is there anything else going on that, I know you're probably still not doing any type of public appearances or things like that, but do you have another book in the works? Anything else that you wanted to take a moment and plug?
I just hope that, people feel comfortable enough to share their story with me. I love hearing about these experiences, and I love just connecting with people, just seeing what their take is on it. I think we need to do more of this in the community, the UFO communities, the paranormal, the cryptozoology. We need to just share data. We need to just share experiences, share stories, share research. As long as we keep these things separated or categorized or classified, we're going to miss out on a lot of stuff, like parallel universes, doppelgangers, time slip. What is that? What do you put it under? So I just encourage people to just share their experience. Don't worry about trying to describe it. Just share it, and we'll just go from there. And if you want to get in touch with me, the website's a great place. There's a contact form up there. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, you're definitely the first person I've talked to who puts them all in one pot. Again, I've had cryptozoologists, and they want to talk. These things are separate, and UFOs and Bigfoot don't mix, or UFOs and ghosts don't mix. There is that siloed effect. This is my specialty. This is all I'm talking about, and I don't want to hear anything else. So you are really the first person that I've talked to who says, "Hey, this is all kind of interconnected potentially. It's all potentially related, It's all part of a spectrum. So that's why I had you on. That's why I thought it was an interesting discussion. Somebody open-minded enough to say these things could all be connected. They don't have to be separate, you know. So, but once again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Justin. And again, normalparanormal.org is the name of the website. And if you want to read the book, The Spectrum, Glimpses of the Paranormal and Encounters with the Strange. Thank you so much, Justin. I appreciate you joining me tonight, and hope you have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. It was awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Bye.
See ya.
So that's Justin Bamforth. His book is called The Spectrum, Glimpses of the Paranormal and Encounters with the Strange. And yeah, you have somebody who is willing to say these things can all be interconnected. They don't have to be separate. They don't have to be distinct. We could have talked about individual paranormal experiences for hours and hours and hours. I think anytime you get a collection of those type of stories, you know, to touch on, you know, some of the more major cases here and there, and then allow you to go and buy the book and read the book and find out, you know, what's going on with that. It's good reading. I don't know about the Men in Black. I know there are conversations. We could make all of these conversations, each individual thing that we talked about tonight, we could have made a 1-hour discussion. We could have talked about the Men in Black for an hour. I just don't know what the point is of the Men in Black. Are they a military outfit? Are they extraterrestrial in nature? Are they something else? Are they trying to shut you up? If that's the case, I mean, are they only finding people who make a report? There's so many things swirling around it. You know, it's definitely different. I've seen the video. If you haven't seen the video, go on Google or YouTube and just type in Men in Black in hotel and it'll pop up. I mean, it's an incredibly popular video at this point, and see these two guys walk in. It's a grainy video. It's kind of far away. You really can't tell their facial features. All you can see are two guys dressed identically walking into the building together. But then you get into the people who give their eyewitness accounts, and they're talking about, you know, the way they looked, the way they interacted, the way they talked, and the general creepy feeling they gave off. And that adds some weight to it. That sort of gives you a little bit more context to what you're looking at there. But yeah, I mean, I think I can get behind the fact that maybe this is a spectrum of activity where, I don't know, maybe just your classic ghost haunted house is on the one end, and then you get all the way over to Bigfoot riding in a UFO across an interdimensional portal on the high strange level of the spectrum. I don't know. What are your thoughts? You can contact us on our email. It's provemewrongcast@gmail.com. That is our email address. You can also contact us through Facebook or Instagram. Prove Me Wrong is the name of the program. You can search either one of those two platforms and you can find us. If you're just looking to find content for the show, if you listen for the podcast, you can find us on any podcast platform that there is. We're on iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio. Anywhere where you find podcasts, you can find the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Like and subscribe to the podcast, and you will be notified when a brand new episode is released. We typically release them once a week, so you want to be the first one to get that information so you can listen to it and be educated, hopefully. We're also on YouTube. You can see the scroll right here. Like and subscribe to the Prove Me Wrong YouTube account. And once again, you will be notified of new episodes as they occur. It's very important to like and subscribe. I appreciate it. Before we go, I do want to say that the Prove Me Wrong podcast is brought to you tonight by Java Remix. Java Remix is the perfect blend of 100% organic Arabica coffee. It's infused with nano-emulsified CBD. Start your day off on the right foot with a great tasting cup of coffee with all the demonstrated benefits of pure CBD. Java Remix offers traditional ground coffee as well as single-serve K-cups in both regular and decaf. And if you aren't a coffee person, Java Remix also offers CBD-infused teas and even beauty products like bath bombs and body scrubs. As an added benefit for our Prove Me Wrong listeners, if you go online right now, that's javaremix.com, and enter the promo code Prove Me Wrong, you'll receive an additional 20% discount off of your entire shopping experience. And Java Remix also offers free shipping on all orders over $40, so you literally have no reason not to give it a try. Once again, that's javaremix.com, promo code Prove Me Wrong. The Prove Me Wrong podcast is brought to you tonight by ZendoZones citronella burners from JT Eaton. They're shaped like fearless little bug-repellent tiki gods. So let Surf and Stan, Hawaiian Howie, and Luau Lily bring the islands to your backyard with ZendoZones citronella burners. Their ZendoZones uses natural 3% citronella candles and incense cones, and they are perfect for patios, decks, backyards, campsites, poolside, and more. You can enjoy the outdoors again. They are available on Amazon.com and at select Ace Hardware stores, so go ahead and collect them all today. So once again, I'm your host, Pete Lieb, for the Prove Me Wrong podcast, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.